And we welcome you to another edition of 307 Baseball.
Oops.
That's a pretty accurate way to start things off if you want to peek behind the scenes here.
Forgot to hit the button.
I'm Elon All, that's Aaron Poling, Anthony Colasuno, and welcome to the 2024 307 Baseball State Tournament Preview. We got a packed show for all you guys today. Of course, we are going to hear from David Suttle of Wyopreps. He's admittedly, we're East or West guys. We don't get a chance to see the East as much as we'd like. We kind of watch from afar with Game Changer, but David Suttle, he is going to help fill that gap in our knowledge as we talk about the upcoming state tournaments taking place in Powell and Casper, respectively. We also will have the boys from KODI, Chance Bond and Wyatt Burichka. They're going to be on in a little bit to talk to us about what's kind of become a very, I would say, dominant corridor of the state, that Bighorn Basin, when you talk about Powell, Lovell, and KODI.
Yeah, it's not only that, it's an interesting rivalry right now, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, with KODI being the team that had the dynasty for a while and Powell being able to step up last year and stop it. And now this year it's kind of, they're going to battle for, you know, back to trying to get to the top of the mountain. And if they're able to do so, that dominance could really continue, as both of those teams have a very good chance when we get there.
Yeah, and you know, you also look at just Lovell, Powell, and KODI in general. There are always three teams we talk about out of the West that could make a noise, make noise and make a run at the state tournament, or just find momentum at any part of any given year and can just take over.
From the West, it will be those three teams from the Northwest. Of course, Powell's the number one, KODI's the number two, Lovell's the number three, Evanston, the lone representative from the Southwest, is the number four. And on the east side, it is, no surprise, Casper number one, Torrington number two, Sheridan number three, Gillette getting the win over Douglas to become the number 4 seed. So that is your 8 teams in the single A state tournament. And of course, it's the usual suspects. In the double A, of course, it's Cheyenne Post 6, Sixers. Then you have the Cheyenne Hawks, Rock Springs Stallions, Laramie Rangers, Sheridan Troopers, Jackson Giants, Gillette Riders. I know I miss Casper Oilers. Of course, they're the ones hosting the tournament. So a lot of great double A action coming your way starting on Monday.
Absolutely. We'll have both the double A and single A state tournaments every single game. You know, myself and Anthony Colasuno will be at the double-A tournament, Elon Olive and Jace Andrews at the single-A tournament up in Powell.
Also joining us will be KODI Beers as well. So we've got the full crew, and then you guys are going to have some people helping you out over in Casper. Should be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and go over the first day's broadcast schedule, because the second day, of course, that'll be determined by who wins, who loses. But for the first 2 days in Powell, we'll have games at 10, 1, 4, and 7. And then on day 3, it'll be cut down to 1, 4, and 7. And then on day 4, 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock, with a state championship game starting on day 5 at 11 a.m. Matchups for day 1. Game number 1 will feature the number 2 seed out of the West taking on the number 3 seed out of the East. That would be the KODI Cubs and the Sheridan Jets. Game number 2, it's the number 2 seed out of the East taking on number 3 out of the West, Torrington Tigers and Lovell Mustangs. Game 3 will feature is our 4 o'clock game. Game 3 is at 4 o'clock. I try to figure that one out. That's kind of fun to say. But game 3 will take place at 4 o'clock, featuring the number 4 out of the West taking on the number 1 out of the East. That would be the Casper Drillers and the Evanston Outlaws. And then it all shuts down of day 1, that is, for game 4 at 7 o'clock p.m. It'll feature the number 1 team out of the West and reigning state champion Powell Pioneers taking on the number 4 seed out of the East, the Gillette Rustlers.
Yeah, so in double-A, first game of the day, obviously starting at 10 o'clock, 10, 1, 4, 7, just like the single-A. The first game of the day is the 4-5 matchup. That will be Sheridan and Laramie, as Sheridan will be the lower seed, Laramie is the 5 seed. Next game of the day will be Rock Springs taking on Cheyenne, the 1 versus 8 seed. Third game of the day will be the 3-6 matchup between the Gillette Riders and the Cheyenne Hawks, before the home team Casper Oilers will make that Casper Drillers will host the number 7 seed, the Jackson Giants, as that is the first day of the double-A tournament up in Casper.
So that is the broadcast schedule for day one. Of course, the single A state tournament in Powell starting on Saturday, with the double A state tournament in Casper starting on Monday, and we can hardly wait. All right, let's get to one of our great interviews, one of the two great interviews we got for you today. Me and Anthony got a chance to talk with Chance Bond and Wyatt Burichka over from KODI in KODI to kind of help us dive into the west side of this single A state tournament. And here's that conversation. Welcoming to 307 Baseball for the first time, the hosts of Sports Stable. We have Chance Bond and Wyatt Burichka. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. And you guys have really done a deep dive into the single A. Chance, you were there with me at the district tournament. Talk to me real quick about how excited you are for the state tournament in Powell starting on Saturday.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having us. We appreciate it. Reaching all the way down into the beautiful part of Evanston down there. I will say the biggest thing I'm looking forward to is the level of competition we're going to see. And I'm excited about having 3 Bighorn Basin teams in this tournament that I think they're going to do well. And then also getting the chance to see some of the East competition. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Guys, I mean, you guys have been pretty steeped in the Northwest. I mean, it's no secret that the Northwest has been the juggernaut. I mean, I would venture to say 3 of the top 6 teams in the state are probably up in the Northwest. Talk to us real quick about these Northwest squads and maybe some things that you only really know about if you're actually kind of living in that Bighorn Basin area.
Well, Wyatt and I go through a lot of this stuff every week. I think some of the best ball players in the state. You look at the all conference, and I think the all conference teams will let you know how good the 3 teams in the Bighorn Basin are. Level, maybe under the radar more than any of them because they haven't been to state championships in the last couple of years. But Carlos Rodriguez might be one of the best baseball players in the state of Wyoming that nobody really knows about because he plays in Level.
Speak about Carlos's game and just what makes him stand out from the rest.
Well, he's a 5-year starter, number one. His glove and his ability to his range is, dare I say, like Derek Jeter range, and he's got an arm that covers it. I mean, he can cover from the deep part of it all the way to second base behind it. He commands the infield. He's a captain, and baseball, his batting style. I mean, you saw it, Elon, over the weekend that he makes contact, see ball, hit ball, see ball, hit ball. He's not necessarily a power hitter, but he will get himself on base and get his guys around. He's just a really phenomenal baseball player.
Wyatt, I want to ask you about the KODI Cubs. I mean, they've won their fair share of state championships. Came oh so close to getting another one last year. Talk to me about, in your eyes, what you think the biggest difference between this KODI squad and last year's KODI squad that may be able to push them over the finish line this year.
Speed and power, really. They bring some speed and power that you look at the 1 through 7 on their lineup, all made all conference, right? The other 2 that didn't get seen, you saw that in Cannon Phillips and Miles Bailey, the other 2 that find kind of the 8 and 9 spot of that lineup. There's no weakness in it at all. Every spot in there. Dominic Phillips leads the state in home runs. Trey Schroeder hits over 400. I think it's 420 right now. They hit more home runs than anybody else in the state as a team. They have over 25 home runs on the season, so they have speed and power. Get them on, get them over. Get them on, get them over. And KODI does it as well as anybody else, and they'll do it at a rapid pace. They average over 12 runs a game.
Wyatt, again, you're kind of in that KODI area as well. Both you and Chance are hometown boys over there. But Wyatt, I want to hear from you. What's kind of stuck out to you about this KODI squad?
I think really what stuck out to me this year compared to last year is they got another year of experience under head coach Bo White. He's in his 2nd year. He knows his play. He knows his team pretty well. He can plan things out. Me and Chance were talking about it. We feel like he's already got his state tournament kind of planned out
right.
as far as pitching and everything goes. But another team, they brought back a lot of great talent. Some of those Dominic Phillips, Trey Schroeder's back. Another thing is that their 1 through 9 is pretty solid batting wise. He was just talking about Dominic Phillips. His hitting is fantastic. Trey Schroeder has a good hitter. He doesn't hit all the home runs, but he can bring in runs when he needs to. And then especially just kind of when that first PAL game, I think this year too, like compared to last year, but the first PAL game they played this year, they've been in it in the thick of things. Last year, not as much as maybe they thought they would, but overall, I think KODI has been able to grow as a team too, especially with the 16-game winning streak they went on, which was, I think, very beneficial to them. But overall, they've grown as a team, but as well as their hitting, their fielding has gotten a lot better. Some of the guys who are 15, 16, who are having to play A-ball early in their Legion careers have really grown as well with pitching, fielding. Cannon Phillips is one of those examples at third base. You got Huntley, who's a good pitcher. Hartley, excuse me, is a good pitcher for this Cubs squad. So just a lot of growth and a lot of mix of youth and veteran experience.
And guys, how big is it, this year, the single A state tournament is in Powell. How big is it for KODI to just have that short drive and be able to just kind of, not have to stay in a hotel and live that away road lifestyle for the state tournament?
I think it's huge. We talked to Coach Wyatt yesterday for extended. We had an hour-long interview with him that we did, and talked to him about that very same thing. He thinks it's very beneficial. It's 22 minutes between KODI and Powell. I mean, it's not even, you can't even finish a cup of coffee by the time you get to Powell from KODI, right? So as we get over there, Lovell's going to have the same benefit because they're only 30 minutes away also from that. So the Bighorn Basin may have, again, one of good teams, but advantages in there because they don't have to stay the night. They can stay a little later and watch another team. They don't have to worry about, their schedules are different than anybody else's. They don't have to do everything team activity wise. If they want to ride home with mom or they want to go right on their own, they're going to be available to do all those things that some of these other teams aren't going to be able to do. We just saw that this last weekend in Green River. Everything is kind of scheduled on a time. And it becomes at that point kind of, I don't know if it's exhausting at that point, but you're on somebody else's schedule. When you're at home, you're on your own schedule.
And of course, we can't talk about the Bighorn Basin without talking about the reigning state champions, the Powell Pioneers, the Big Four. The guys that got them that state championship, they're all back this year. We're talking Queen, we're talking Johnson, we're talking Schwann, and of course Trace Stenderson. And Powell, they got bit by the injury bug early this year, but it seems like they're really rounding into form for the postseason.
Well, and that's exactly right, is that we saw some injuries that they had to work themselves through with Jet Schwann and even Brock Johnson. I don't think it matters now because they're all back, they're all strong, and they're all ready. I would really expect day one of this tournament to see Brock Johnson right away, game one, because if they get to that championship, they're going to get 2 starts out of that guy with starting on day one. So I think Powell is going to, they're going to be all guns blazing. And we saw them again in Green River. That ballpark could not contain the home runs that they were hitting. But Queen had 6. We had 5 out of Brock Johnson. Trace Stenderson also had 5. They were hitting grand slams and home runs. They scored 25 runs against Rollins. And it felt like that every single one of those kids on that team had power. It's going to be a tough team to beat. With the pitching that they have and the bats that they have, it's a tall order for any team in the state of Wyoming.
And I wouldn't even add just the 4. I would say their whole team pretty much came back from a year ago. It's one of those players that just from the top of my head that I remember, but they pretty much brought everybody. So they know how to play together. They know how Borders coaches. He knows the way they approach things. So, Powell knows the experience. They know how to win a state championship, and they'll probably take that same mentality and same style going back into their home field this go around.
And Wyatt, what are some of the keys for Powell to repeat as state champs, especially with just the big players they have, back for this year?
For Powell, I think one is pitching. I think they have 2 really good, solid pitchers, Cade Queen and Brock Johnson. When do they play is going to be a key factor. Where KODI's obviously going to see one of them if they meet each other on day 3 or day 5. Mm-hmm. It's going to be one or the other. If they're hitting the way they hit on Saturday or this past weekend, if they can do it again, I think that's going to help them a lot. They play in their home ballpark, so they know where their best places are to hit the baseball. They know their field. They know their field well better than some of these teams from the East. And then Evanston too, because Evanston, they get to go to Powell this year. So I think they really have an advantage as far as that goes. But I think just the same way they won the district tournament, the same they won state last year. Just how do you approach the state tournament with your pitching, your depth? Because depth really comes into a factor as far as the state tournament goes.
We're going to have David Settle on to talk about the East because he's able to keep track of that a little bit more. We're in the West. We're we're going to stick with what we know. So here's what I'd like to do. 4 teams out of the West, the 3 from the Northwest. Of course, we talked about Powell, Lovell, and of course, KODI. And the lone representative from the Southwest, the Evanston Outlaws. We got to give them some love. I think a lot of people were thinking that, hey, it could be an all Northwest 4 coming in here. But Evanston, they showed that they belong and they can go play at the state tournament this year.
And we talked about that. And I got a chance to call one of the games with you, and I was super, super impressed with Gavin Oliver. I thought, man, that kid is. We were kind of I don't say making fun, just that we do this thing where we do the top 6 players, and I really did have Oliver out in that, and I was like, man, maybe I need this extended maybe to top 10 because Gavin Oliver has a place in the best players on the west side of the state of Wyoming. That's for sure.
Well, when we go through it, we talk about, of course, in the postseason, you expect the Trace Stendersons, you expect the Cade Queens, you expect the Brock Johnson, you expect the Dominic Phillips, you expect the Carlos Rodriguez, all these big names to do their jobs. But in the postseason, you need them to do their jobs. Plus, you need kind of one of those under the radar X factors. Let's go ahead and start with KODI. In your mind, who is that under the radar X factor for the Cubs?
Cannon Phillips. That's it. Cannon Phillips. He's in a spot, and I'm being serious because we talked about this. Right now, he's hitting over 600 with runners in scoring position. He's a 15-year-old kid, and he doesn't know that he's not supposed to be doing what he's doing. He just goes out there, again, same thing, see ball, hit ball. He's not a power hitter. He'll just put him in the alleys, and he'll put him down the lines, and then he just trucks it around until he's told not to. I mean, so he is one of those kids that just understands what to do and where to be, but at the same time is young enough that he doesn't know that he's not supposed to be doing this. And he's in that spot, that 8 spot, that lets him see a lot of fastballs, lets him also, because those guys ahead of him get on base. So it gives him a lot of RBI opportunities for him. I just think that kid is going to be a factor because everybody else above will do their job. He just is going to be that X factor.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and move to Lovell. Who do we think that X factor is? Of course, we've got Carlos Rodriguez, Leif Files, Tucker Jackson. Those kind of seem to be the straw that stirs that drink. Who's going to be someone in your mind that you think has to step up and have a big tournament to help them out?
Third baseman Alex Hedges. He's shown some power. He's shown some pop in the bat. When he gets going, because those other guys will get on base, he starts going in that 4 spot. That kid, we saw what they did against there at the West, at the West Regionals. He got going in there and really started generating some runs. We saw with the level, their 12 runs that they scored, with 13 runs, I'm sorry, against Evanston that second game. Alex Hedges, I think, is a factor there.
Wyatt, do you have anyone else we need to keep an eye on for those 2 squads?
Chance, I think, hit the nail on the coffin with KODI, with Phillips. I mean, any 7, 8, 9 hitters honestly could be an X factor. And he hit the nail on the coffin with Lovell. Alex Hedges is kind of one of those like under the radar guys. He's a big important key player for that team, but he really doesn't get enough credit, I think, where he should. But yes, Chance, I think, hit the nail on the coffin with those 2 picks.
All right, I'm going to ask you now for Evanston, because I've got an answer. I've got an answer for Powell, and I've got an answer for Evanston. But I want to know, you've seen almost as much Evanston baseball as me this year.
Yes.
How, maybe even more, let's be honest, because other things kind of took me away.
Yeah.
But in your mind, who's that X factor for Evanston? And we'll see if our names match up.
I'll say Jackson Osborne behind the plate, a great defensive catcher, and also can hit really well and has been a RBI supplier throughout the season for Evanston. So Osborne is going to be huge behind the play in the state tournament for the Outlaws. That's my X factor.
That's the name I had as well. And I think Chance knows where I'm going with this. He had some at-bats where you look at the batting average, it's not as high as you'd like, but when you watch a Jackson Osborne at bat, same thing with Tony Natoli, who hits behind him in the order. They're very, very patient, and that kind of recon of getting pitches and getting those types of at-bats, they pay dividends, especially in the postseason.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to jump in here, guys, but I want to add to that, I think, because I saw both of those guys play it. Their approach is amazing. They're taking pitchers deep into lineups, deep in the pitch counts, 7, 8, 9 pitches, because they're looking for something. And when they hit it again, when they get what they want, they're going to drive it. We saw both of those guys back to back play well. For Evanston. I think that's a big factor of why they're at where they're at.
Yeah. And then for me, and then I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about for Pal. I think Jordan Laura. He's coming on as probably one of maybe that next guy that's going to be one of the big arms for Pal. I would imagine we're going to see him get the ball in a game, and he's going to have to help them out because I mean, you talked about K Queen, you talked about Brock Johnson, but it's a 5-day tournament. You have to have those guys that aren't the big names come in and make a name for themselves. I think Jordan Laura is in a prime spot. I saw him pitch a gem in the night invite over in Green River earlier this year. He's got a lot of potential, and I would imagine we're going to see him get a game at the state tournament. And I think that is going to be one of those moments that if Pal does win the state title, people are going to look back and be like, that win, that performance is a big reason why.
Seen him move up and down the lineup. I've seen him at the 2 spot. We've seen him at the 7 recently, more recently at the 7 spot, which I think is a good spot for him. He's got some speed, left-handed bat, and that dude can cook, man. I don't know if you've seen him, but he can move on those base paths. He's a stolen base threat. He plays every position. He plays in the outfield, he plays in the infield, he plays shortstop, he'll play second base, all over the field. And yes, he can throw. The kid's got an arm.
I mean, throw Jet Schwan. He hasn't gotten his name out there as much as he did last year, and the way he played at the district tournament. If he can do what he did with the events that happened to him, I mean, he's gonna help Powell just fine. I know he's maybe one of those top 5 players for the Powell Pioneers, but he just hasn't been able to consistently be able to be on the field this season. And just to see what he did at the districts, if he does that again, he's gonna help Powell in a big way.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of been the story with Pal this year. Is it's as soon as they seem like they've got the band back together, there's an injury. Something kind of goes on that has kind of not been able to let them kind of take the field with their full prowess. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with this state tournament. It was interesting. I talked with Coach Borders at the beginning of the season, and I asked him flat out, did he like the fact that Powell's hosting the state tournament? He said he'd rather have the boys on the road because it's a lot more kind of confined of a bubble. That's interesting considering what Coach White said. He likes the fact that it's going to be a kind of a de facto home state tournament for them. So it's really, really interesting to see the mindsets and the different opinions and different takes these coaches have to these situations.
Absolutely. And I think that's the same thing as the approach that they have as teams, how they do things. You know, we call it Cubby baseball, right? We got to play Cubby baseball. The Pioneers, they call it near baseball, right? It's how the Nears play the game, and they play it differently. But I think they're both built to beat each other. I think it's why they go to Montana. That's why they go across to Colorado. That's why they go to Nebraska. They play all these games all over the place to come together in these spots to try to beat each other. We talked about Evanston, the same thing. I think Evanston's in that same deal. You look at their record, and their overall record is like, but then you find out where they're doing, what they're going, how they're doing it. And in a lot of these cases, it just makes those teams better. I think makes the state tournament better. And that's why we don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Well, and we also got to talk about the East. I mean, of course, Casper's the number 1. Torrington's got a lot of momentum coming into this thing. Of course, we're not as well versed in the East because we're out here in the West, and it's not like every game is being broadcast. There's a few games you can catch. But I tell you what, that Casper squad, for the last couple of years, they've been good. And you talk about Cubbies baseball, Nears baseball, and Outlaws baseball and how it's played different. I would say Casper's starting to develop an identity. Ever since 2021, they have kind of developed their game on very potent, very fast striking offenses.
No, I agree with that. You look at some of the batting averages across that team, not a lot of pop. I'd say that as far as their bats, not a lot of pop, but a lot of high averages, a lot of base runners, a lot of guys getting on and getting over. I won't dare to say small ball, but it almost feels like that's what they're about, is to get them on, getting them over. So yeah, and they score a lot of runs. So I think it's a team that can be dangerous.
And then again, of course, Torrington, they're always a threat. I mean, of course, Torrington had a great run at the state tournament last year. They're back this year. Gillette's coming back. Sheridan's there. It's just, you look at these 8 teams, and it's going to be something special over in Powell.
Well, and I sit there and I take it from Wyatt and I would talk about this, is that Torrington team, the same kids that play baseball played football. This is a team that won 2A state, moving up to 3. So those athletes are there. You start matching up. If you're good in one sport, you're probably good in another, right? And I think Torrington, Eel and I, we talked about this, that Torrington might be on the hottest streak there is at the right time. I mean, they're just kind of running through folks right now. I like that Torrington team a lot, and Gillette is Gillette, right? I mean, it sounds kind of cliche, but saying it's a team that they get in the tournament, I wouldn't look past them at all.
What?
And of course, you speak of Torrington's hot streak right now. How huge is that for that Torrington squad, going into the state tournament with the momentum in their favor?
Well, I think it's huge. Go ahead.
Yeah, it absolutely is huge. I think we saw it last year when they played in Sheridan. I mean, they kind of peaked at the right time, and they unfortunately just ran into KODI. I mean, if they didn't have to play KODI or Powell, I think they're in the state championship game just based off the momentum they had last year. And they don't give themselves an easier path. They probably have Powell in the second round. They probably have a chance to face KODI. So if just play their kind of baseball, they're going to be just fine. But I think it's huge for Torrington, just the way they kind of just ended the season. It's kind of like how KODI did that midway point where they won those 16 games. Winning those big crucial games in conference helped out, and beating teams like Douglas and Gillette and Sheridan. They beat the quality teams at the right time and take that momentum, and I think they're going to be just fine.
I have Torrington playing until day 4.
Okay. That's definitely a possibility. Yeah. I'm not going to reveal my bracket, but I do want to ask. I want to ask about day 1. So the three of us will be there. Anthony, you're going to be at AA State, yes, which is going to be a whole other thing. We'll talk with David Settle later about that. That is just going to be a bloodbath, I feel like. But you and I, the three of us will be there, and Pal, and you're going to be there covering KODI. We're covering every single game, but of course I'll be there covering Evanston. So outside of the teams that we broadcast for, what is the matchup that most intrigues you?
Good.
I would say Torrington Lovell day 1. I think that's the one that can go either way. Lovell is really good. They can win those 2-1 games, but they can also play games there with the 10-run rule teams. And Torrington's the same way. They've played those scrappy games. Torrington kind of reminds me of Green River in a couple of ways, just because they're so scrappy. I think there's just a better scrappy team than we've seen Green River in the past. But Lovell's a good team too. I mean, they've beaten KODI. They swept Powell in a series. I mean, they have some quality wins too. So if there's one matchup that stands out to me, it's Torrington Lovell, just because I think either one of those teams can win and go far. So that would be my day 1 match.
No, I'm right with it. I'm just going to dovetail right off of that for the same exact reasons. They're very similar teams to each other. They're scrappy. They're all overshadowed most of the season. Because they're not the glitz and glamour of the KODIs or the Caspers or the Powells or the Gillettes. So they get kind of overlooked. But they'll come in there with the big stick and they'll start whooping on you. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of indicative to what Torrington is and anything that they are. They're scrappy. They work hard, they care a lot, and they're talented. I mean, and Lovell, and the same thing is that we see that's 3 towns, 3 high schools that make up the Lovell baseball team. Rocky Mountain, Lovell, and Grayville actually make up those 3 teams. Those are really in the Bighorn Basin. Those are quality teams in there. So you have 3 schools to make up a team. That'll be a fun matchup.
You guys took the words out of my mouth. Looking at that first day, I mean, outside of the Evanston and that game, I think that Lovell Torrington game, I think, is going to be probably one of the best games of day 1. When we get further down into the bracket, the games will get tighter and tighter. What could be happening on Wednesday night is Tuesday night is absolutely mind-boggling. Monday night. Sorry, I've got my days mixed up. Whatever day 3 is. It's there, but looking at that first day, I absolutely agree. I think just for the fact that they're 2 very, very similar teams, Torrington's got a lot of momentum coming into this tournament. As you mentioned, as Anthony mentioned, they have a lot of momentum coming into this tournament. I think that Lovell, don't discount the momentum they have either. I mean, they actually went and they went and got that 3 seed. They won a barn burner against Green River in Green River at the 7 p.m. game. Never an easy thing to do in the postseason. And then you got to give them credit for putting up some runs against KODI. It's going to they've got some momentum themselves, so I think it's going to be fascinating. Also, who's going to be pitching that day? I mean, I think that's going to be the big question in every game is who are these managers going to deploy game one? Are they going to have a pitch count like what we saw with Level in that Green River game, pulling Tucker Jackson at 3 2/3 innings to make sure he was available for Sunday? It's going to be fascinating to see how this all works out.
No, and I agree with you absolutely that the most intriguing part that I'm looking forward to is what kind of pitching these coaches. I have, and it's the same thing. Sometimes there's things that we know because we ask the right questions, and it's because we don't reveal everything that we're given those opportunities to know this stuff. I know what the rotation is going to look like for KODI, and I'm curious what everybody else is going to look like because, again, you pitch day one, you get your starter, that guy can pitch in a championship if you want him to.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. Got anything to add, Anthony?
I'm all good here.
Well, guys, thank you so much. That is Chance Bond and Wyatt Burichka with KODI Radio. Remind us what's the name of that show you guys are doing that's focusing on American Legion Baseball now?
It's called the Sports Stable.
The Sports Stable. So, and where can people find that?
So it's every Wednesday. We broadcast it live here every Wednesday from 5 to 7. And we had Coach Wyatt on yesterday. We'll have that up on our Facebook page and our website, kodiradio.com, and KODI Radio on Facebook.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Chance, Wyatt, we'll see you guys at the Single A tournament in Powell.
And thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Welcome back into 307 Baseball. I'm Anthony Collison alongside Aaron Pulling and Elon Olive. A great conversation with Wyatt and Chance as we broke down the Single A state tournament, and Elon, just a great overall conversation about the teams that we're going to see ahead.
Yeah, those guys really know their stuff when it comes to the Northwest. The West side, there's been a lot of talk about the West side in this Single A state tournament. Again, we're not as well versed on the East side, and we don't want to make up anything. Like, you know what I mean? We don't want to talk about something we really don't have a right to talk about, but we are aware that the East is going to be very, very formidable. Casper and Torrington, the top two seeds, those guys come in with a lot of momentum and a lot of talent.
Yeah, speaking of the East, I want to make a correction. It is the Casper Oilers in AA. I apologize for the mistake. I thought I had it wrong the first time, and I corrected myself into the wrong answer. So the third time, I will correct myself as the Casper Oilers who are hosting, and I apologize for the mistake.
Well, and that's a great time to kind of transition to our next interview. We had the professor, David Settle. Buckle up, guys. He brings us so much insight and so much knowledge. Isn't that right, Aaron?
Absolutely. He's, I got to spend a lot of time with him last year at the AA state tournament as we shared an Airbnb, and just every question I had about Wyoming high school sports, he was able to answer. And it's just amazing the knowledge that he has of sports. And it's not just, of the season. There were questions I was asking about schools that I was uncertain of, and he would give me the whole history of, it was Thunder Basin High School was one of them, gave me the whole history of Thunder Basin, and it's just amazing how much knowledge he has of Wyoming sports.
And he's going to help fill in our blind spot, which is the east side of the state. He adds a lot of really great context and a lot of really great just stories coming from that east side of the state. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Wyopreps' David Settle. Welcoming a good friend of the show, of course, it is the professor, David Settle. David, state tournaments are here. We had the C tournament. B is going to be starting any day now. Of course, A starts on Saturday. AA starts on Monday. It's a great time of the year.
It really is, guys. I look forward to this time of year all year long, especially if you're a baseball fan. And I just like to see these guys that, maybe we've been talking about or you've been following the last couple months. What do they do when it's all on the line? And that's kind of what I look forward to the most. Who's going to step up in crunch time? And yeah, I know we've got our favorites here and there in the different levels, but you just never know, especially this time of year. Somebody takes a surprise loss, whatever it might be. Somebody pulls a surprise win, however you look at it, but still, it's just a lot of fun this time of year.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and start it off with the Single A tournament taking place in Powell starting on Saturday. The 4 teams from the East, it's going to be Casper, Torrington, Gillette, and Sheridan. And from the West, it is the reigning state champions Powell, the Dynasty KODI. Joining them will be Lovell and Evanston. Talk to us about where you see that Single A sitting right now.
Well, you've got 6 of the 8 teams back in the field from a year ago. That Northwest division was so powerful all year long. You knew Powell was going to be good. They had a lot of guys coming back from last year's state championship team. I knew Jason Border's squad had the potential. They got off to a pretty good start. KODI got off to a slow start, but I just had a feeling that Bo White's squad was going to be there, and they'll be in the mix coming up, starting Saturday, going through next Wednesday. They got on that hot streak. I think that's the longest streak anybody's had all year when they rattled off 16 in a row there after that kind of up and down start. And then Lovell, boy, when they won a couple against Powell, I was taken aback a bit. I'll be honest with you guys. I just thought, okay, maybe you get 1 out of 2 in a doubleheader like that, but not both against a pretty good team. But that just goes to show you any given day in the sport of baseball, anything's possible. You get a guy who's just, maybe he's just on that day from a pitching standpoint, hitting the spots in the zone for whatever umpire's calling the game. Maybe he's got his curveball working. Maybe it's a slider. Maybe he's just spotting that fastball. That just goes to show you. So those 3 teams, I think, are right there. The 4 from the East are pretty tough. But what's interesting is KODI took care of Casper a couple times this year. It's been interesting. KODI's taken care of Sheridan a couple times. Didn't quite get as much crossover, but I think about, I don't want to leave out Lovell because Lovell goes to the Bull and Woodbat in Douglas and wins it all a few weeks ago. And they took on some pretty solid teams. I know they lost to Evanston right away, but, when I talked with Leif Files and even Coach Jameson a little bit after that, they both said, boy, we got off the bus and it was just blah. And they were like, from the time that game ended against Evanston, they were like, we are atoning for that. And they did. The rest of the weekend won the tournament title, taking down Torrington. So I honestly think anybody on a given time could get on a roll this weekend because I don't want to overlook Gillette or Evanston in the 4 seeds. That's what I mean by any given day. I'm curious to see who pulls the upset this weekend because it happened last year. Powell had to come from behind. I thought Powell was the favorite going into state last year. Excuse me, but they ended up being one of those situations where they had to beat KODI twice. They were able to do it because they had just enough pitching, and obviously they've got the offense to go with it. But, I mean, you just never know what type of surprises happen and what that does to the bracket. So I'm really intrigued by these 4 first-round games coming up Saturday in Powell.
In your opinion, covering these state tournaments year after year, what would you say is the most important attribute for a team to have? Would you say it's maybe the arms in the pen, or would it be the offense showing up? What's most important when it comes to winning a tournament like this?
Well, you got to have the offense. There's no doubt about that because you've got to have guys come through in situations. It's not necessarily the overall offensive output. You could have a great game, throw out 10, 12, 15 hits, but if you don't put the situation in play where you're hitting with runners in scoring position, where you're getting that clutch 2-out, 2-strike hit, whatever it might be, that's where I look at from an offensive standpoint. But to me, the more valuable aspect is how deep is your pen? You touched on it right there, Aaron. It's a lot of arms. You've got to have guys that when they step on the mound, they hit the zone. They pound the zone constantly. If you're walking guys, hitting guys, giving up those free bases, that comes back to hurt you 9 times out of 10. Yeah, there are guys that have the ability to kind of work around a walk or two, but for the most part, in my opinion, you've got to find ways to pound the zone. So pitching is a little bit more than the offense, but you do have to come through with situations. So I look at deep pitching staffs. Who's got the most arms that are effective this time of year? And because you could have a guy with an off day, and that might come back to bite you in the butt. I mean, it almost did to Powell last year, but they were able to overcome it. I thought they kind of got in that, they kind of burned Brock Johnson in that one situation, which really shocked me, but that kind of kept them alive. But then you didn't have him for one of your basically your championship game or your, if necessary, second championship game. And I was curious, do they have enough arms to overcome that? They did. So that's where you got to look at whose staff is the deepest this time of year. And that's where I'm not sure if Evanston's got enough. I'm not sure if Gillette's got enough, if Sheridan's got enough. It seems like the top 5 that have kind of been the power group for most of the year, Powell, KODI, Casper Drillers, Torrington's there because they've got plenty of arms. But again, those guys have to go out and they've got to perform at the highest level.
Well, and also in game one, you're probably going to see one of the top two guys there because winning game one is such an important trend setter. But what we kind of saw in the district tournament, Mike Jameson of Level, masterful job. Tucker Jackson is throwing 3 2/3 of an inning. He's perfect pitching a game against Green River, but they're thinking ahead and they pull him right at the 40 pitch mark so he can go Sunday. I imagine we're going to see a lot of that type of chess playing throughout the week, especially if you can get a lead early.
That's exactly right, because it's that, can you get away with something? If you go with your ace in game one, how long do you let him go before you bring him back in a tournament? Let's say we're talking A or double A. You start your ace in game one to get you off to that good start, maybe shut down an opposition. How long do you let him go? Do you let him only go 45? Do you let him go 60 and hope that you get to day 4 so you can maybe bring him back? That is the $1 million question that every coach right now at the AA and A level, and even the B level, as they get ready to start their tournament in Torrington, is sitting there going, all right, how long can I go with my guy? How, can we get the offense going enough? If they throw their best guy, that's the $1 million question, especially for some of these higher seeded teams that have maybe the deeper pens, whether it's a POW, whether it's a KODI, whether it's a Casper Jewelers, a Torrington, your top 2 seeds on each side in A. How deep do you go with your top guy? Because at some point you need to bring him back so that you have a chance to win a championship. That's a question, because I've seen teams where they pull a guy and it backfires. I'll give you an example. I think back to 2019. I was covering a team and they went 81 with their guy and then pulled him. And I was like, you're already over the limit. Just go with him to finish the game. They decided to pull him and it worked out. And they ended up, they didn't end up needing that guy, but it almost backfired on him. I mean, because the closer role came in, gave up a few hits, I think gave up a run or two. They had enough cushion, though, built in. But that's that scary scenario. If you burn a guy and you can't bring him back, well, what do you do when you get to day 2 or 3 if you run into having to use multiple arms? That's the $1 million question I think all these coaches are thinking about and contemplating as they get ready to start a state tournament.
So let's go ahead and talk about the east side of the single A bracket. And, it's one thing that we probably don't get enough to see because the teams that we cover don't cross over to the eastern side of the state enough, I think. What are some of the strengths of the 4 teams, and what are some of the areas that they might be vulnerable on the single A east side?
Casper Drillers have a great offensive attack. If they can keep their bats going, they will be in the mix. They do have a good pitching staff, I think. And, Coach Bix and squad have done a good job kind of rolling guys, and I think into different situations. And what I mean by that is they haven't been afraid to throw different guys against different opponents. Now, no, it hasn't always worked out. Case in point, I think back to Casper had a chance to clinch outright the single A number 1 seed and split at Buffalo, the 8th seed. And you're going, whoa, well, guess what? Stuff like that happens in the game of baseball. I think Casper's there. Torrington has shown consistently to me in the last month and a half. They got off to maybe a little slow start. I think you have to factor in, 1, they always seem to start a little bit later, and 2, they played some tough opponents early on. So they finally found their footing, found that rhythm of the season. I think Torrington's shown that they have a chance. They've got several arms. I think it starts with Desmond at the top there, but you've got some other guys that are pretty good at throwing. And offensively, between not necessarily Desmond, but Hager, Hibben, a couple other guys that can really pop. They've got some pop in their bats in the middle of the lineup. So for me, the key for Torrington is, how do you fill 6, 7, 8, 9? Where do those guys, can those guys produce enough to flip it over to the top of the lineup so you get to those big bats at the top of the lineup more? And that's kind of a question for a lot of these teams is, can you flip that lineup over to get your top tier guys at the top of the lineup more at bats than not in a game? Sheridan, they've been kind of hit and miss, but I will say this for the Jets. They've been coming on here down the stretch. I think they've picked up some key wins here, kind of got themselves worked up into the 3 spot when I thought, maybe is this a team that finishes 5 or 6? They really came on second half of the season. So they've got some ability. They've got some guys. Dom DeStefano is one guy I look at that's kind of a leader for that squad. The Bowers kid. I'm probably missing a couple right off the top of my head. The Lamb kid's pretty good. There's no doubt about that. So they've got some guys. The question for them is going to be how deep are they pitching wise? And that's where I think, 1 or 2, 2.5 to 3, they can compete after that. And that's everybody I've talked to here down the home stretch. It's been, we've got top line guys, but can we create that depth in our pen? That's been the goal of a lot of, I think, coaches trying to look at this time of year and then realize we got to develop that over the last month of the season. That's maybe been the biggest question mark for a lot of these teams. And then for Gillette, they're kind of in the same boat. They've got some top line guys. They do have some guys that can produce up and down the lineup. Kason Schilling's one. Newman's another guy. Carmine Newman. Forgetting a couple other guys, but they wouldn't have gotten in there. And we're talking about all these teams are above 500 too. You didn't have somebody as surprised that was below 500 that kind of squeaked in. So the East side is intriguing in that they did beat up on each other a little bit. I will say that to me, the Drillers and the Torrington Tigers kind of separated themselves a little bit, but I wouldn't put it past the Jets or the Rustlers to pull a little surprise at state.
I like the point you made about the bottom of the order, though, because I think that really dictates how a lot of teams play. And obviously, we cover Evanston, almost all of their games. We were there all the time, and there's a big difference with the Outlaws of when they're bottom of the order is producing. You get to the top of the order with the guys that typically they're table setters, but hey, you get an opportunity to get to the top of the order to clear the table. You put your offense in a good spot. So I really like that point, and I think that could really be said about maybe all of these teams.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because it's one of those situations where you, as a coach, you're building your lineup. Right, my leadoff guy, I need a guy who's going to see pitches to kind of set the table for the guys behind him, work the count, find a way to get on base. Usually your 1-2 guys are pretty good in terms of on-base percentage. 2 guys sometimes sacrifices that on base because he is sacrificing, whether it's laying down a bunt or, just trying to move the runner. I think of your table setter, a guy who is willing to give it up for the team, but also can put it in play in any different way in the 2 spot. And then you go 3, 4, 5, you're looking for your RBI guys, right? So that's why I said 6, 7, 8, 9. If you've got an extra RBI guy at 6, that's a bonus. But then 7, 8, 9, can they put it in play? And that, I think that's something that can be said as well, Aaron, to kind of go and back up that point is sometimes it's as simple, put the dang ball in play. Mm-hmm. Don't strike out. And now, if you're patient enough and can work a walk, great, but put the ball in play. Put the pressure on the defense to make the play. And sometimes defenses break down this time of year more than you want them to. And so put the ball in play. Can your 6, 7, 8, 9 guys do it? Can that 2 guy execute a bunt, or can he slap it somewhere? I mean, who is doing these situational things? That's why I kind of brought it up earlier.
Well, and we've seen that actually kind of in action, especially at the Western District Tournament. I mean, Pal's a great example. You've got Brock Johnson, you've got Trace Denderson, you've got Cade Queenie, you got Jet Schwan, the big 4, as we're kind of calling them. But you need the Dalton Worstels, the Jordan Lauras, the Aiden Greenwald, those guys to really show up if you're going to defend that title if you're Pal.
Well, and I think you can say that about any state championship team that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. You have those guys that step up in the crunch time. And Pal had that last year. We've seen that out of the KODI Cubs. You think about KODI's run, 7 of 9 championships until last year when they got knocked off by their Park County rival, the Pioneers. They were deep and they produced up and down the lineup. Yes, did they have their stars? Absolutely. And they've got their stars again this year. I think about, Phillips, Schroeder, Duke in the middle of that lineup, but they got some other guys that, Jarrett Carlson, I know I'm forgetting Thomason, those guys. I mean, the depth of their lineup, that's what makes those teams so good. And, if a guy has an off day, typically out of those good teams, you see somebody pick up the slack a little bit. And that's what makes those top tier teams tough to beat.
Well, looking at as specifically at the West, since I was at the Western District tournament, I watched every game. I got to see them kind of up close and personal for 3 straight days. Every team that came out of the West, they have those 3 to 4 guys that you just know are going to be consistent. You're right. It's going to be those 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 guys that are going to really determine this. Real quick, we need to move on to Double A. We talked a lot about Single A, but I want to get your thoughts on how each conference handled the district tournament or district series as what they did in the East. Talk to me about that a little bit.
All right, so the West District tournament was obviously a true district tournament. I don't think you need 4 days. I think you only need 3 days. It was unfortunate that you had one team drop out because then 2 teams had automatic wins and buys. That's tough to see, but I've been around long enough to see that at the AA and the A level. Heck, I saw a AA tournament that had one team that was ineligible. One team dropped out way before, and another team was ruled ineligible. So you did a 6-team bracket, which was interesting in a state tournament, and that's why we've kind of gone to the current format to try and prevent something like that happening. And that's something they'll have to address in the off season. What's interesting was the East decided to go with this best-of-3 series. It was brought forward and voted on and approved, and the guy who kind of led the charge no longer at the A level. So that was interesting because you know, and you know, that was that person's decision. I'm really not trying to throw anybody under the rug. It was just a different approach. I thought it was interesting. I think some of that was, let's find a way to get our best teams to the state tournament. That's where I think the best-of-3 came around is when you think about it, best-of-3 series, your better teams, more than likely, the odds are they're going to prevail, right? And so I think that's where they decided, instead of running a risk of somebody gets injured, burns a pitcher, something fluky happens, we don't get our best 4 to state. I think you could have tossed a coin like between Douglas and Gillette proved it. They went to Douglas and won 2. It wasn't even a best out of 3. They swept in the one day. So I think that was the goal, and I think the East has maybe its best 4 outside of Douglas. I would throw them in the mix, but that was kind of the goal behind it, was trying to get lessen the upset probability, and let's get our best 4 to compete with the best 4 from the West. It is a unique format. There's no doubt about that. And I even had somebody asking, well, how in the world do they seed this thing? And I was like, well, you just go down the line. If the top seed wins, they're 1, and then 2, and then 3. Well, then 5 beat 4. Well, guess what? 5 gets the 4. And I was like, we had the one series went 3 games because the Shine Eagles went up. They upset Sheridan in the first game. The Jets fought back, split, so they had to go. Well, if the Eagles would have won, they would have been the 4, and Gillette moves up to the 3. That's how that would have gone. And hopefully people kind of understood that, but I did have somebody ask and had to explain that.
Do you think they're going to be doing that again next year, or do you think we'll see more of a traditional district tournament in the East next year?
That's a great question because I haven't talked to a ton of coaches about it, and I'd be curious to get their reaction at state. That might be a great question that you pose just in casual conversations, Elon, when you're in PAL, because I'd be curious to find out what the 4 teams that did make it, what their coaches thought of the format. That's going to be a major offseason question because I've heard pros and cons about that situation. And like I said, I understood it, the probability of trying to get your best 4 to the state tournament.
Let's go ahead and move on to the AA tournament. It's kind of one of those things where the last few years you can almost pencil in the Sixers. They've had a little bit of a turnover with their coaching staff and losing some players, but they're still a very good team. Just what are your thoughts of at the top of this AA bracket? I mean, it seems like it's been super competitive throughout the year, and that really, this is one of those tournaments that truly, I think at the top of the bracket, anything can happen.
I'm going to give you 5 teams I think that can win it. The Sixers are still the favorite because until you dethrone the king, good luck to you, right? Yep. Now, Casper proved last night. They went to Cheyenne and split a conference doubleheader on the road. It took them 10 innings, but they fought back from a 3-2 deficit. They let a lead slip away in both games, but give Casper credit. They're inching a little closer. I think they just need maybe a little bit more from a pitching standpoint, but they've got a big three-headed monster right now, maybe even four-headed monster. So, I mean, I think sometimes people forget Casper was the runner-up last year. I mean, they deserve to be right there in the mix, and they end up tied. By the way, in case you're wondering, the Sixers win the tiebreaker on runs allowed.
Okay.
So they're going to be the top seed. Casper is going to be the 2. I will put Gillette has the capability because I know Nate Perleyberg's squad is there. I'm not going to count out Austin Cowan and Sheridan. They can get hot. That was the one thing. Sheridan was the top seed. Guess what didn't show up last year? Their offense. And I can almost guarantee Austin Cowan's squad will come to hit at the state tournament. They did not perform well in Jackson, or at least up to their standards as they had played all year last year, winning the regular season. Their offense did not quite come through like they hoped for last year. I think Casper will show up Sheridan will show up in a major way. And then, I don't think you can discount the Hawks. I think they've played competitive across the board this year. I am going to take out Laramie a little bit just because of some injury situations, guys. Not saying that Laramie won't fight and compete and try and play hard. I know that they've got some injury bug, unfortunately, and it's probably biting the wrong personnel in the wrong spots, and that might prevent them. Now, if those guys are all of a sudden magically healthy, and I don't know the status, I'll be honest with you guys, even though I'm here in Laramie, if they are healthy and ready to go and things feel fine with a couple of their guys, then you can throw them in the mix, and then I think you got 6 teams fighting it out right there.
So, David, the last 2 years at the AA state tournament, we've kind of seen both sides of the coin. 2 years ago in Sheridan, we saw a tournament that just did this, full of all sorts of last-minute comebacks. It was probably one of the greatest tournaments I've ever been to in person. And then last year, we kind of had one that kind of went chalk and followed the script, so to speak. What are you envisioning to happen in Casper this year?
Well, I will say, yes, it did kind of go chalk last year, but you had some great games. Aaron, you can attest to that.
Yeah,
I mean, we had some awesome games. I honestly thought from an overall standpoint, the state tournament last year in Jackson was about as competitive as I've seen it in a while at the AA level. Yeah, it was up and down, and there were a few things that kind of went sideways the year before in Sheridan, but from a competitiveness standpoint, tight games, execution, those situations, whether you're pitching in a big situation or hitting in a big situation, I thought it was fantastic in Jackson. I think you could see that again this year. Now, Jackson's a little on the younger side. Rock Springs, I don't think you can discount them. I think of this Rock Springs team that Coach Rondinelli has a little bit back to a few years ago in Gillette when they almost knocked off the Riders as the 8 seed. Cheyenne better be careful. And Coach Harley knows he's been around the block, being an assistant or tie lane all these years. He knows he'll have it. But I think I'm looking forward to another competitive environment. Really, I think you're going to see some tight games, nip and tuck. Yeah, you could have your 1 or 2 blowouts early, but I really expect some tight games. And it's going to come down to some situational spots. Can a guy with 2 outs, 2 strikes, when you're down 1, can he get that base hit to the gap that scores a runner from second to tie the game? Can a pitcher work around what I was talking about earlier with the free passes? I expect Cheyenne to be there. I think Casper's going to be there. I think Gillette. I think Sheridan. I honestly think it's the top 4 have too much for the bottom 4 right now. And so that's the way I look at it. And until somebody knocks off the Sixers, you got to go out and prove it to me. Now, can Casper do it? Yes. Could Gillette do it? Yeah. I think if you talk to the writers, they felt they let 2 really tight games slip away in Cheyenne way long time ago against the Sixers. And then Sheridan's been right there. They took Cheyenne down twice, albeit on their home field. So it's going to be interesting. If I've got it right, I think your first round matchups this year are going to be Cheyenne Rock Springs, Casper Jackson, Gillette and the Hawks, and Sheridan Laramie. If I've got the tiebreakers right. Because after everything finished up yesterday, I know Rock Springs or Jackson are playing today to end the regular season, but they're non-conference games. Based upon head-to-head, the split between Casper and Cheyenne, and the split between Laramie and the Hawks, the runs allowed tiebreakers gives the Hawks the Sixers the tiebreaker and Laramie the tiebreaker over the Hawks. So I think it's Cheyenne, Casper, Gillette, Sheridan, Laramie AA, the Hawks, Jackson, Rock Springs. I think those are your 8 seeds in order if I've done my homework correctly.
Well, quick question for you. We look at all 16 of these teams that are going to be going to the state tournament. For one for single A, one for double A. We know who the top seeds are, but who do you feel has the most momentum going into the state tournament in each one of these brackets?
Powell Pioneers, boy, they bashed the ball in Green River. I think they have found a good flow offensively. I think they're going to be tough to dethrone. And gosh, double A's tough for me right now, guys, because I think Casper's nipping at Cheyenne's heels. I think the split in the regular season finale Tuesday night in Cheyenne gives Casper the confidence just enough that they can do it. I'm still going to go with the Sixers, though. The Sixers will, I still think they've got just enough. And that winning mentality combined with the fact that they got it done at the regional and they were the Final Four in the World Series last year. I think even though they lost key guys, they have enough of those guys back. And they've had some, Sixers have been banged up. I mean, they just got Mason Tafoya back from an injury. So they've got enough guys that have been in big situations. You got to go out and beat them. Now, Casper's nipping at their heels. I think they're right there, but I'm going to go Powell and Cheyenne as kind of the favorites going in. And I honestly think both those teams can make another run at regional. I really do. I think Powell can make a better run at regional this year because I think they learned something in Havre last year. It's going to be interesting to see what happens out in Rosebud, Oregon. And then going up to Billings, you only have one Wyoming team this year. So that's going to be interesting. Curious to see what happens out of Montana, a couple of the other spots, but I think Wyoming's champion at the AA level could do some damage at the Region 7 Northwest in Billings this year as well.
Let's keep the theme with Cheyenne. Let's talk about the Hawks for a second. I think they're one of the more fascinating teams that are going to be at the AA state tournament just because, you know, they were single A 2 years ago. Now they move up to AA to kind of fill a hole that was needed. And, you know, last year it might not have started the way they wanted to, but this year they've seen great improvements. How much do you think for those kids, do you think it's going to help them when they get to the Sixers, just being able to go through a couple of state tournaments before getting up to, quote unquote, the top AA team in the town?
That's what makes the Cheyenne program right now that much more difficult to beat because it's exactly that. These kids are now playing at a AA level. They're playing higher caliber competition. The Hawks did play a few single A teams, but less this year than last year because the schedule had kind of already been worked out. So they've played a tougher, higher caliber schedule this year. Brad Barker's a great manager. I have a lot of respect for Brad. They've got a couple of great pitchers. Kean McDonough's fantastic. Zach Hall has stepped up as another great pitcher. I think if they can iron a couple other guys out, maybe like a Broden Robbins, a couple other guys on that mound, they are right there. That's why I threw them actually above Laramie based upon some of the things I know. I think the Hawks are going to make an impact. You know, I think back to they had to play post 6 in the opening round last year, if I remember correctly, or maybe it was the second game. But
no, you're correct.
It was one of those situations, and they were like, you know, it was like you get the warning from the state commission. It's like, no, I don't want any funny business. Let's go out and make sure this is actually you're playing to win. You're playing to win, not, you know, you're just giving it to your, you know, fellow post 6 counterpart, so to speak. The Hawks, they want to go out and prove some things. And, you know, I think they learned a lot from last year, and they've gotten a lot better because they're competing at a higher level against higher level teams. And coming off that little Caba championship down in Texas, boy, I know it didn't start out well as they lost a couple, but they still got a couple wins and playing some tougher competition. I think that's going to have the Hawks ready. And if I was Gillette, it's not going to be as easy as when you face the Hawks in conference games back in, I think it was late May, early June. That's going to be a different Hawks team. They've got a different kind of walk in their step. And I agree with you, Aaron. They are intriguing because of the 2 guys I mentioned on the mound. If they can have a few other guys step up on the mound, they've got enough in the offensive attack, you know, that they can do some damage at the state tournament. You got to watch out. Again, it comes down to you just never know on any given day. And that if you get an upset like that, then that's going to throw a monkey wrench in the bracket, and then you got you're left scrambling. And it's who's got what left and how do you fight your way back. And that's always a tougher path.
That is David Settle of Wyopreps, of course, the professor, we call him here on the show. David, thank you so much for everything. Can't wait to see how all these tournaments break down. Anything else before we wrap it up?
Not really, guys. It's been fun to watch. I'm really interested to see how it all pans out. Elon, have fun, and pal, stay dry, or I should say, stay cool.
Yeah.
Aaron and I will try and do the same in Casper, although it's not quite. I think Powell might end up being hotter than Casper, but I think both locations it's going to be hot. So stay hydrated, and we'll. I'm really interested to see how this all pans out. I can't wait to get to Casper on Sunday afternoon and play in on Monday. I'm curious to see what they do with the brackets. I mean, obviously the A bracket's out. We know that, but which was interesting to see that the top seeds play at two different times. One's playing day, one's playing night, and then somebody's going to have to come back and play a little earlier than maybe they wanted to in day 2. But you know what? It's just it's a fun time of year. I don't know how you don't look forward to this time of year.
We do every year.
Absolutely.
David, thank you so much. We'll see you over there.
Guys, take care. Thanks so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. Take it easy. Have a good one.
A big thank you to David Settle of Wyopreps for joining us today. Of course, we call him the professor, and as you can see, he took Aaron and I to school for another great lesson on just what's going on, not just on our side of the state, but really all around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a great time to talk to David Settle, and you just learn so much from him because we talked about before the interview, just the encyclopedia of Wyoming high school sports. He's so much fun, and he's got a lot of hats that he wears. Not only that, I'm sure most of you are aware he's also the voice of the Wyoming Cowgirls basketball team.
And he's also the voice of the Laramie Rangers.
That too, yep.
So that he'll definitely be in Casper. It's going to be a lot of fun, and Laramie's it's going to be fun to watch that team as well as the rest of the AA teams over in Casper. And that is going to do it for our state preview. Big thank you to Chance Bond, Wyatt Burichka, and of course David Settle for joining us today. And guys, it's state tournaments. They're here. How are we feeling?
Excited.
Very excited.
I will repeat that. Remember, Single A state tournament starts on Saturday. First game at 10 o'clock featuring KODI taking on Sheridan. Second game at 1 o'clock featuring Level taking on Torrington. Third game at 4 o'clock featuring Casper taking on Evanston. And then the final game at 7 o'clock. But we'll be on the air a little bit early as opening ceremonies are scheduled to take place at 6:30 as the Pal Pioneers, reigning state champions and hosts of the tournament, and they're the number 1 seed out of the West. Big statement for them saying, you know what, we are already in the state tournament. We're just going to go and win that district title again. They will be taking on the Gillette Rustlers. Again, that is the first day of the Single A state tournament live from Pal's Edlin Memorial Field on Saturday.
And coming to you from Casper, 10 a.m. will be Sheridan taking on Laramie. 1 o'clock will be Rock Springs taking on Cheyenne. At the 4 o'clock game, it will be the Cheyenne Hawks taking on the... Boy, I just spaced on that. Sorry, the Gillette Rustlers. As
Rough Riders.
Man, I'm off today. I'm not very good at this. Really bad at this, actually. The Gillette Riders, they will take on the Cheyenne Hawks in an intriguing matchup. Then it will be the 7 o'clock game, the Casper Oilers taking on the Jackson Giants. Sorry, I had to take a second to get that one right. Can't get 2 wrong in the same segment. We allow 1 wrong per segment before things start to get hairy over here, is what we'll say.
Well, it should be a fun time. And again, those games are on Monday. And if you've never watched Jackson at the state tournament, they always seem to have something, especially when they're playing in that 7 o'clock game. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's that 7 o'clock game, regardless of where it's played, it's always special when it's the home crowd, and whether they're the top seed or the higher seed or the lower seed, it just always seems like it's a great atmosphere and it's a lot of fun. And I'm just excited for the first day of the tournament. Playoff baseball and AA is officially starting, and it's just a great time to be a baseball fan here in Wyoming.
All 16 of these teams that are going to be competing for a state championship, they all have are very, very quality clubs and all have the potential to get on a roll and do something really, really special at these two tournaments. Anthony Colasuno, your final thoughts.
Yeah, just excited. A great end of the regular season, and I can't wait to see what happens in the state tournament. It's state madness time.
Aaron?
Yeah, madness. That's a good word for it. I mean, anything can happen. That's why you play the game. If it was on paper, we could mark champions as, by one seed in stats, but that's just not how baseball is played. You got to get out on the field. You get your 7 at-bats. The other team gets their 7 at-bats, and that's what's great about the game of baseball.
And something always happens that is magical in the postseason, especially for the sport of baseball. Memories were created last year and previous years. The big question is, what legendary memories will be created in 2024? Join us on Saturday live from PAL. That tournament runs through Wednesday, and then join us Monday live from Casper. That tournament runs through Friday to find out. I'm Elon Olive. That's Anthony Colasuno. That's Aaron Pulling. And we'll see you guys from PAL on Saturday and then from Casper on Monday. Good luck to all the teams. Safe travels, and we'll see you there. Thank you guys so much.